Hey, what's going on, guys? Blake over at Centrifuge got me on the thinking train this morning after posting something on site confirmation about a chart he found on, I think, Police One, and kind of just got the rabbit hole this morning and going into that. So, site confirmation is not really something that, at least in my state, has been touched on at all in the academy. You usually just hear, something like a gross site picture or a refined or fine site picture, which means a lot of different things to different people. So in the last probably 3 to 4 years, I think site confirmation as a whole has been taught by a lot of different instructors, so it's pretty commonplace now. I think the two camps that you typically see will be levels, like teaching at like 1 through 3 or 1 through 4. Some will call them color confirmation, some will call them levels, like a 1, 2, 3, 4. But they're pretty much saying the same thing, just different verbiage of how to explain it. The 1 through 3 camp is using kind of what we have in front of us here, 3 different styles or 3 different site packages that you're seeing, what you're seeing in your sites. The first one being gross, right? So that would be like an index. So using the optic housing or your rear plate of the pistol as a gross aiming tool. The second would be more of a streak. So you're seeing some of the red dot either flash onto your target or streak across it in the acceptable area that you want to hit. And then the last one here, static. Some will say stable, stopped, whatever it is. That is more or less your highest confirmation or your highest level of aiming, right? So a higher degree target or higher difficulty target. That's kind of the basic 1 through 3 package. The 1 through 4, all that really does is, instead of having this category of gross, that they're leaving that as either the first or level 0, you want to call it 0 confirmation. So they're actually just kind of putting this in its own category, and they kind of split this level 2 into like 2 different sections. So you'll have like a flash of red, so red anywhere, the dot anywhere on your acceptable hit area. And then you have a second category that is more the dot looks like a dot, it's kind of floating across the target, like figure eighting across the target, so to speak. And then you still have the highest confirmation, like your level 3 would still be the stop and stable dot. So just two different variations of that. I kind of fall into the camp of keeping it simple, right? Because coppers or knuckle draggers, it's just simple, so less levels to kind of think about. In my head, it's just easier to, especially to demonstrate to students, right? So I have been using the levels like 1 through 3 for a while. I kind of like this concept of just associating it with risk instead of saying, hey, this is a level 1 confirmation package, this is a level 3, and just kind of delete that verbiage and just use risk in its place, right? Because that's really what we're talking about anyways. All right, so kind of going through the package here, you have levels of risk, right? Low, medium, and high. And what that basically is, we're tying an appropriate site picture to a trigger press with that based on difficulty or risk, right? What is risk? Law enforcement context here, that can be a few things. I would say that 1 and 2 would be difficulty of the target. That is going to be the size of the target. Is it an open target, partial, hostage target, low percentage, etc. And the distance of that target, right? Are we talking 3 feet or are we talking 25 yards? Okay. The type of trigger press we're talking about here, that can be anywhere from a prep press, traditional, take the slack out of the trigger, refine the site picture, then press. A slap, just one fluid motion, or kind of the hybrid, which is a roll through. Think of like a double action revolver, starting at the front and just kind of control your rolling through, right? Kind of gradually adding pressure as you go through. That could be a little more rapid, that could be a little more controlled, just depending on what you're looking at, right? So some will call that a controlled slap. All right, so that's kind of how we break down all 3 of these categories. So if you think of it, we have a low risk target, so somewhere like 3 yards and in, right? This could be a contact shot. This could be a dude, right up in our face as we open the door. So very low risk as far as for me to make that hit, so to speak. Right, like you could also tie into backdrops, right? If we're, have a cluttered background, like we're in the middle of a school with children, right? That's obviously not going to be low risk. We'd have to take a little more confirmation to verify that backdrop is clean. But just to keep it simple, right? We're in an open field, whatever reason we have a target that's in front of us from 0 to 3 yards. This is something that would be acceptable. So I'm just using the outline of my optic housing for a red dot gun, or I'm just using the rear back plate of my pistol as a gross aiming tool, right? So I present that to my, eye target line. I see that site picture that's appropriate, and then I just smash the living crap out of the trigger. If I took the amount of time to pick up a red dot or to pick up, a refined site picture, then obviously I would have the time to prep the trigger, right? So in this case, I only have, ample and not ample amount of time, right? Very reduced timeline. So I'm trying to get some type of sight confirmation on the target, and then I'm just smashing the living shit out of the trigger because of the difficulty of that target is so low. Hopefully that makes sense. Moving down the line to medium risk, we are talking about anything past that 3-yard line. And then obviously it's going to be very subjective to individual skill, right? So if I didn't touch on that before, right? So we had, for risk, we had target difficulty, which was the size of the target. And then we also had the distance. The third category for that would obviously be individual skill set, right? Like JJ Racaza may have a very easy time hitting target at 15 yards with a streak, and maybe the average copper sees 15 yards is like, wow, I better have a very refined sight picture. So it's going to be very dependent on the individual. So that medium risk can be anywhere from past 3 yards for the average copper up to maybe 10 yards, right, where I can use a streak of a dot. Again, that's plus and minus depending on skills. Where all I'm going to see is as soon as that dot is on the acceptable area, so we'll just use an A zone, for example, and the dot is touching that A zone somewhere, it's continuously in motion, right? Then I can press the trigger. How I'm going to press the trigger, again, very dependent on individual skill set. So that can be, again, if I trust my grip is solid, my vision is solid, then obviously I can just slap the trigger. I can roll through that trigger, so kind of like a hybrid between a slap and a prep, or I can do a traditional prep press, just depending on what we want to do there. The last one here, the high risk target, right? That can be a very distant target, something that's low percentage, right? Hostage target. That would be a time where I'd want my dot to be as stable as possible, given what we have in front of us, right? This is never going to be a traditional stopped dot because obviously the dot is always going to be in motion, but this would be as limited movement as possible, right? So you'll still see a little wobble in your sight picture, and that's acceptable. That's no problem at all because that's what's going to happen in real life, right? So it's not completely stopped, but it is as stable as possible and as refined as we can get it for what we need for the target. All right, once we have that appropriate amount of aiming, right? So it's the highest level of aiming, right? The most time we're taking on that, then I should, in theory, right, or in reality here, have time to prep the trigger, right? Could I smash the trigger on this type of confirmation? Sure, you could, but if I have the time on my side to where I'm taking a little bit more, again, time to confirm these sights, I should have the time to at least take some of that slack out of that trigger, right? And that might be a traditional prep press, that might be a continuous roll through of the trigger. But in that style, if I am taking that finite amount of time to get the dot to stabilize and calm down a little bit, then I should have the time to prep that trigger in the process. So that's kind of how I think of it. Nice, I kind of keep it as simple as possible. I know we're rambling a little bit here. The two things that need to stay constant through all of this, no matter what you're doing for risk assessment here, is your grip and vision need to remain the same, right? That is the constant. My grip needs to be whatever I choose. Say it's a crush grip with my support hand and a firm handshake with my firing hand. That needs to remain constant throughout the firing sequence. My vision needs to be a very small spot on the target itself to be target focused, right? I can't be drifting my vision back to the dot. I can't be looking at the general target area because that's too much space for human error to kind of creep in. So I think of like a small tack spot or a coin size position on that target, and I'm staring that with hate in my heart to try to drive my vision there. All right, hope this makes sense to you guys. As far as on the law enforcement side of things, right, just kind of basing my sight picture, tying it to a trigger press, basing on risk. Take care. All right, some visual examples, because I know folks are visual learners out there. Some of you guys are. So for a low risk / level 1 / using a gross index here, all that really looks like is as I present the pistol, it lines up with my eye and target line. As soon as I see that back plate of my pistol or the optic housing aligned with the general area of what I'm trying to hit, then I can smash the living crap out of the trigger. Moving up a notch to the moderate risk or level 2 for confirmation, where I'm looking for a more or less streak of the dot, where the dot is kind of continuously in motion. The dot would look something like this. Let's see if I can get it on camera here. Somewhere in the center, and it would just be around the target somewhere. Well, in recoil, obviously, it'd be streaking around, but as soon as on the draw, my dot is somewhere in the acceptable area, then I'm taking the shot. I'm not waiting for it to stop. So that might be, on a transition where it's kind of floating around. That might be my initial draw where I pick it up in somewhere in this A zone, or that might be, again, continuous motion while I'm firing during recoil. We're just kind of streaking on target. One of those options. The last one we're talking about, which is a higher risk or stopped stable dot, level 3 confirmation, if you want to call it that, is where my dot is in the area I'm trying to hit. So again, this would be my A zone here. For me, more stopped and stable. So you'll notice there'll be a little bit of wobble, right? But for me, obviously, this would I consider that higher risk or a higher confirmation, where the dot is kind of just as stable as possible. You'll still have a little bit of natural wobble. Same thing if I was trying to hit the head box over here, right? natural wobble inside the head box. Highest level of confirmation. All right, last thing we touch on as far as what kind of trigger management we're doing, just so the verbiage that I was using in the demo there makes sense. The 3 styles that I utilize or teach. The first would be the slap, nice and simple, right? Fingers on the trigger, and I'm just smashing through. If you want to leave it pinned, just so you can see this full motion of the trigger. Obviously, reality, you're blasting through it and then getting off, and it's either smashing again or getting back to that wall. The second would be a roll through. This could also be called a controlled slap, a roll through, or a zipper, right? One fluid motion starting from front all the way to the rear. Obviously, you guys would not be leaving this pin, but as you can see, it's one motion. In reality, it would look like this, where I'd roll through and then get back to that wall. The last one would be the prep press. So what that looks like, I'm taking the slack up out of the trigger till I get that refined wall, and then I have one of 2 options. I can add continuous pressure until it breaks, or I can get to that wall, refine my sight picture, and then smash through, right? Either way, when I'm doing this technique, just like the other 3, I'm not leaving it pinned to the rear outside of what I'm doing just for this demo. It'd be take the slack up, confirm my sights, break the shot, and then immediately get back to that wall. Hope that helps.